Rania was standing by the window, watching the snow falling outside. There was a deep sadness on her face, and the hope that had been broken in her eyes. 8 years had passed since the wedding, but still no ray of happiness had come to her courtyard. Silence reigned in every corner of the house, and her life seemed to have stopped. The sound of snow falling outside reminded her of the emptiness of her life. Sir Faraz, perhaps the peace of children is not written in our destiny. Rania said in a low but deeply sad tone. Her voice was clearly filled with fatigue and disappointment. She turned and sat down next to Sarfaraz, looking at him. There were tears in her eyes and the lamp of hope hidden in her heart was about to go out. I have even stopped praying. Maybe Allah did not hear our prayers. Sarfaraz looked at Rania. There was such sadness on his face that for a moment his heart broke. He knew how patiently and courageously Rania had gone through this journey. He himself was also going through this pain, but he always showed courage in front of his wife. He slowly got up and sat near Rania and held her hands in his strong hands. Rania, don't say that. Believe in Allah. What we did was within our capabilities. And if it is not fate, then perhaps there is some good in it that we do not yet understand. There was love and courage in his eyes. Life does not revolve around just one goal. We are enough for each other. Doesn't this smile of yours support me to live? Rania looked at Sarfaraz in disbelief. He always tried to share her sorrow, but today it seemed to her that perhaps he was comforting himself too. She took a deep breath and said, Sarfaraz, I have buried my dreams, my hopes, and my prayers. I am tired. People point fingers at me, call me infertile. Every night I wonder what I am lacking. Sarfaraz's heart melted after hearing all this. He moved closer to Rania and wiped her tears with his hands. Rania, no matter what people say, they cannot change our destiny. We are not accountable to anyone. Our love is the greatest strength. If we do not get the peace of children, it does not mean that we have failed. We have each other's presence, which is no less than any blessing. Rania listened to him, but the disappointment remained on her face. She stood up and started pacing around the room. But Sarfaraz, this loneliness is eating me up. This silence is driving me crazy. I wanted the laughter of children to echo in my courtyard, our world to be complete, but maybe this was a dream that will never come true. Sarfaraz stopped her and pulled her closer to him. Rania, happiness is different in the destiny of every person in the world. Some get wealth, some get fame, and some get children. But we have received a blessing that many people do not have. Love. We are with each other, and this is our real success. Tears welled up in Rania's eyes again. Can this love fill this emptiness in my heart? Can it erase the pain in my heart that grows with every child I see? Sarfaraz took a deep breath and fixed his eyes on Rania's face and said, maybe it can't fill it completely, but I promise I will never let you feel alone. We will win this journey together, no matter what the destination. And remember, sometimes God gives us what we need, not what we want. Rania nodded slowly, but it would take time for the sadness in his heart to disappear. Outside, snow had covered the ground in a white sheet. Sarfaraz went and sat down on an old wooden chair in a corner of the courtyard. The cold December night was silent, but a storm was brewing in his heart. The icy wind was touching his face. But he had no feeling of the cold. His mind was numb and his heart was filled with sorrow. The moon was spreading a faint light between the clouds in the sky ahead, and he was lost in space looking at this light. Sarfaraz had his mobile in his hand. He was repeatedly looking at the screen, where his medical report was open. The words of the report began to float before his eyes, as if they were hurting him again and again. Infertility due to azoospermia. These words fell on his heart like a stone. He tried to ignore these words many times, but each time they tore him apart. He knew that Rania was the only support of his life. Not hers. Her words, her love, everything was extremely important to him. But the fact was breaking him from within that the reason for their childless life was his own lack, not Rania's. His heart wanted him to look up at the sky and ask, and he did so. O Lord Mustafa, O Lord of the worlds. He spoke while looking at the sky in anguish. Why did this happen to me? I have never wished harm on anyone, I have never shown my heart to anyone. Then why did you put me through this test? There was helplessness in his voice, as if he was fighting with his own existence. Oh God, if you wanted to test me, then find another way. What kind of test is this? What kind of test is this that instead of being the source of my wife's greatest happiness, I have become the cause of her disappointment? Tears started flowing from his eyes. He sat silent for a long time, sometimes clenching his fists, sometimes looking at the sky, as if waiting for an answer from there. But the sky remained silent, and he was immersed in the memories of his past. It was about a month ago. Rania had started falling ill often, and her health was deteriorating day by day. She was worried, praying all the time that a small happiness would come to their house. Seeing the hopeful smiles of the children on Rania's face, Sarfaraz's heart would break. He thought many times that maybe this was written in his destiny, but then he would console himself. At Rania's repeated urging, he had secretly had his medical tests done, because it was a big blow to his manhood. He knew that it could hurt his iron, but his wife's anxiety forced him. He somehow kept himself in check until the report came, but when the results came out, his world collapsed. Why did all this happen to me? He muttered. What should I tell my wife? She who cursed her shortcomings every day, who always thought that she was the sinner, how should I tell her this truth? Rania had asked him many times to get her tests done too, but he always laughed it off. You don't need to worry, everything will be fine. This was the phrase he used to tell Rania every time, but deep down he himself did not believe it. That night, Sarfaraz reviewed his entire life. He began to wonder if this was the result of some mistake on his part, or was it just a test of nature. His heart began to pray, a prayer that contained supplication, helplessness, and immense humility. O Allah, please perform a miracle. Remove this deficiency of mine. Show the effect of my wife's prayers. I want to see her happy, Lord. His voice was lost in the cold air. He knew that this war was not just his own. It was a war of his dreams, his relationship, and his self-esteem. After a long time, he got up from his seat. His eyes were red, but he had made a decision. He would accept this truth, but under no circumstances would he inform his wife of this fact. As he took a step, he was immersed in the silence of the room. The mobile was in his hand, and his eyes were on the screen, where the words of the medical report were piercing him every moment. He was going through the biggest test of his life, but he was not ready to give up. Suddenly, his mobile rang. He was shocked and looked at the screen, and it was a call from the office. He quickly received the call and ended the conversation by saying, "Yes, sir," in a formal manner. After ending the call, he took a deep breath and stood up from his seat. A strange conflict was taking place in his heart. He came into the room and saw Rania, who was in a state of prostration on the prayer place and was crying loudly. Tears filled his eyes, but he controlled himself and stood silently. The thought kept coming to his heart that he should tell Rania the truth, but he was holding back with fear. He did not know what Rania's reaction would be. For a long time, he stood there and listened to her sobs. His anxiety was increasing, but he was busy in a vain attempt to ignore his compulsion. Finally, he quietly went to the other room, where his faithful dog, Sherwa, was present. Sherwa had always been his companion, someone he could talk to about his heart. Sarfaraz stroked Shuro's head and said softly, "Take care of Rania behind me. She is very delicate-hearted, and I am afraid that she will break down in loneliness." He was talking to Sherwa as if she were a human being and his closest confidant. Shuro wagged his tail as if he understood. After some time, Sarfaraz felt that Rania's prayer was over. When he returned to the room, he saw that she was wrapping up her prayer. Her eyes were red and signs of fatigue were clearly visible on her face. He took a deep breath and moved closer to his wife. Sarfaraz supported Rania with his strong arms and gave her a loving kiss on the forehead. "I just got a call from the office. I've been called in an emergency. It might take 2 to 4 days. You take care of yourself and share. I'll be back soon." Rania's eyes immediately filled with concern. She said spontaneously, "Will you travel in such cold weather? Take care of yourself. These December winters are deadly." Deep worry was evident in her tone, which was felt in every word. Sarfaraz smiled and kissed her forehead again. "Don't worry, I will take care of you. And I'm telling you the same, take care of yourself." As she left, Rania came to drop her off at the door. Cher was also walking alongside them, as if he wanted to be a part of this farewell moment. The icy wind was touching their faces and snow was starting to fall from the sky. Stopping at the door, Rania held Sarfaraz's hand and said softly, "I will be back soon. The house is deserted without you." There was a mixed feeling of love and anticipation in her voice. Sarfaraz looked at her for a moment and said slowly, "I will be back soon. You are my strength. And yes, don't bother Cher too much." Saying this, he smiled and Rania also smiled lightly. But behind the smiles of both of them was the pain and helplessness in their hearts, which they were trying to hide from each other. Sarfaraz took slow steps and walked along the snow-covered path. Rania and Cher both stood at the door, watching him go for a long time. Somewhere inside, Rania felt that there was a heavy secret hidden in Sarfaraz's heart, but she was afraid to know this secret. Closing the door, she turned back, and the scent of Sarfaraz was still in the room. He relaid the prayer mat and raised his hands to pray. "O Allah, protect my husband and ease the burden on his heart. Amen." Rania sat on the prayer mat for a long time, talking to Allah about her heart. Sometimes she would ask questions, sometimes complain, and sometimes give words to her own pain and shed tears. It seemed that she wanted to open up to Allah in all her helplessness, pain, and longing. Finally, the burden on her heart became a little lighter, so she wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and carefully packed the prayer mat and put it aside. She got up and walked towards the kitchen. She had not eaten anything since morning, and in her grief, she could not even think about Sarfaraz's breakfast. Going to the kitchen, she quickly made breakfast for herself and also arranged for Shuro's food. While working here and there in the kitchen, she was trying to control herself again and again. Her heart was still heavy, but she had decided to keep herself busy so that her mind could be diverted to something else. After preparing breakfast, she came to the dining table. As soon as she sat down on her chair, Shuro immediately followed her and sat down. He was working exactly as Sarfaraz instructed, as if he realized that Rania needed a companion at that moment. Rania smiled and patted Shiro's head and said, "You are really my little companion, aren't you?" Shiro wagged his tail in response. She started eating breakfast silently, but during this time, a smile would come to her face every now and then when she saw Shiro's loving gaze. After finishing breakfast, she went to the living room. As soon as she sat down on the sofa, Shiro W quickly came to her and started trying to attract her attention with his special movements. Suddenly, Shiro W came to her shirt and started pulling it lightly. Razia was surprised. She stayed in her place for a while, wondering why Shiro W was doing such a thing. Then he shook his head and smiled, patting Shiro's head and said, "What happened, Shirwa? You're getting a little closer today." Shirwa sat on her lap and started moving around her, as if he wanted to say something. This sweet gesture of his softened Rania's heart. She hugged him and started making love to him. "You are really strange, but I like your strange actions very much," he said with a smile and made Shirwa sit close to him. At the same time, Rania's mobile rang. She looked at the phone in shock. Sarfaraz's name was flashing on the screen. She immediately received the call and slowly pushed Shiro aside. "Hello, Sarfaraz. Have you arrived safely?" she asked as soon as she put the phone to her ear. Sarfaraz's voice came from the other side. "Yes, I have arrived safely. How are you? Did you have breakfast or not?" A country smile came on Rania's lips. "Yes, I just woke up after breakfast. And your lion is taking care of me very well, he is always with me." Sarfaraz laughed and said, "I told you, Tana, he is my special friend. He will not leave you alone. But you also take care of yourself and do not go out for too long in the cold." Rania said softly, "Don't worry. I am perfectly fine and am having fun playing with the lions. Take care of yourself, the cold is there for you too." Sarfaraz paused and said, "Okay, but if there is anything or you need anything, then call me immediately. I will be back soon." Rania smiled and said, "Yes, I know. You always take care of me. May Allah bless you," Sarfaraz said in a loving tone, "and you always pray for me. This is the greatest strength for me." Rania slowly said, "Amen," and ended the call. She sat there for a while, feeling a sense of peace in her heart. Sherwa came closer to her again and sat at her feet. Rania smiled and said, "Come on, now we will spend time together, okay?" The lion wagged its tail, as if it supported this. Rania took a deep breath and thought to herself that perhaps this is the beautiful aspect of life, where small moments become a source of great comfort. Time was passing at its own pace, but for Rania, every moment felt like a century. 4 days had passed and Sarfaraz's absence had become unbearable for her. A strange feeling of anxiety and loneliness had intensified in her heart. Finally, she plucked up the courage to pick up the phone and called Sarfaraz. Sarfaraz picked up the phone on the first ring of the call. "Hello, Rania. How are you?" There was a hint of fatigue and worry in his voice. Rania said impatiently, "Sarfaraz, where are you? 4 days have passed. I miss you so much. There is no one at home and this loneliness is eating me up. When will you come back?" Sarfaraz sighed coldly. "Rania, things have become a little complicated here. I will have to stay here for another 4 days. But don't worry, keep the windows and doors closed and take care of yourself." Rania's voice began to tremble. "Sarfaraz, my health is also getting strange. I have been vomiting repeatedly since morning. I think something is wrong. You should come quickly. I need you very much. Helplessness and longing to meet were clearly visible in his voice. Sarfaraz fell silent for a moment, as if trying to make a decision. Then he said in a serious tone, "Rania, my dear, understand me. I am forced here for work, frequent travel is not possible. And the head has not given permission either. But you go to the nearest clinic, get yourself checked up. And look, take good care of yourself." Rania said in a tired tone, "Okay, I will go to the clinic. But you come back quickly." Saying this, she put down the mobile and sat down in her place, her anxiety increasing. There was moisture in her eyes and her heart was pounding. Suddenly, Sherwa came to Vas and sat near her feet. His movements always soothed Rania's heart, but today he seemed restless too. Sherwa suddenly repeated the same movement. He slightly removed her shirt and started licking her stomach. Rania was surprised and helplessly pushed him back. "Sherwa, what are you doing? You are strange too." She spoke a little annoyed, but in her heart she started wondering what was happening. Doubts and suspicions started to arise in Rania's heart. Her health had been bad since morning and all this was beyond her understanding. She pushed Sherwa aside and lay down on the sofa. She closed her eyes and tried to rest for a while, but her thoughts were not letting her rest. Is all this an illusion of my mind or is there really something wrong? She started asking herself. Sherwa sat on the ground near Vas, looking at him as if he knew that Rania needed comfort. Night was approaching, and a strange silence had fallen over the room. Sherwa would sometimes wag his tail, sometimes he would come closer to her and sit down. Rania said in a deep voice, "Sherwa, you are with me, right?" Sherwa replied with his special gesture, and there was a strange glint in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Rania took a deep breath and tried to comfort herself. "Everything will be fine. Sarfaraz will come, and this heavy heart will also heal. Maybe it's just mental stress." But in some corner of her heart there was an unknown fear sitting, which was making her restless. Sherwa went near her stomach again and laid his head, and Rania smiled and said, "You are really strange, Sherwa. But your presence reduces this loneliness a little." He took Sherwa in his arms and started patting him, praying in his heart that these days would pass quickly and Sarfaraz would return. 4 more days had passed, and Sarfaraz still had not come home. During this time, he called Rania several times and advised her to go to the nearest doctor. But every time Rania would put off the matter by saying, "I am fine now, if you come, I will go with you." Although her health was not really good. Vomiting since morning, nausea, and sudden dizziness at night had become her daily routine. Her condition had worsened in those days, and now she herself was worried. On Sarfaraz's last call, when he told her that he needed 2 more days, Rania hung up the mobile helplessly. Sarfaraz had been gone for a full 10 days, and now he was asking for 2 more days. But Rania's condition was not supporting her. Her heart was growing restless, and her mind was confused. Finally, she made a decision. Rania put on a long coat, tied a dupatta on her head like a hijab, and covered her face with a veil and came out of the house. The cold wind was a constant reminder of her face, but her steps were slowly moving towards the nearest clinic. On the way, she felt a strange fear in her heart. Repeated vomiting, dizziness, what does all this mean? She was asking herself questions. Upon reaching the clinic, the doctor greeted her gently and motioned for Rania to get up. The doctor, observing her condition, said, "How are you? What are your complaints?" Rania slowly began to describe her discomfort. The doctor listened carefully and paused for a moment to look at her carefully. Then he said softly, I suggest you get a test done. I think there might be something else going on. Rania nodded silently and took a blood sample. She went outside to the waiting area and sat down. Every moment felt heavy for her. Many thoughts were coming to her heart. What could be wrong? Why is all this happening? After about an hour and a half, the doctor called her back to the room. When Rasia entered, the doctor had a reassuring smile on his face. For a moment, Razia was surprised. Why are you smiling, doctor? The doctor slowly motioned for her to sit down and said softly, Rania, congratulations. You are pregnant. You're going to be a mother. Raya's eyes widened in surprise. She said in disbelief, What are you saying? It's not possible. The doctor smiled and said, It is possible, and it is true. Your test results are completely clear. All these complaints are due to this happiness. Rania put her hands on her mouth in disbelief and tears started flowing from her eyes. My God, is this really true? She got up from her seat and fell into prostration. Zara was crying profusely, and tears of joy were not stopping from her eyes. Oh God, thank you. You have given me such a great reward. The doctor immediately stood up from his seat and took her in his arms. Rania hugged him and started crying. These tears were of joy, of peace, of gratitude. The doctor gently explained to her, You have to pay special attention to your thoughts now. There are some instructions that must be followed. Rania nodded silently, her feelings of gratitude still alive in her heart. As she left the clinic, her heart felt strange. As soon as she reached home, she called Sarfaraz first. But despite calling him repeatedly, his phone was not being received. Finally, she got tired and put the phone aside. When Sherwa came to her, she hugged him and started crying, but these were tears of joy. She went to Sherwa's ear and said, Sherwa, do you know? I am going to become a mother. You will soon be able to play with a little friend. The lion licked his face, as if he too shared in his joy. Rania smiled slightly and picked the lion up in her arms. 2 more days passed, and finally the day arrived when Sarfaraz reported his return. Rania's heart was filled with joy. She quickly decorated every corner of the house, as if a special guest was coming. Sarfaraz's favorite dishes were arranged on the dining table. When the bell rang, her heart started beating fast. She opened the door and welcomed Sarfaraz with a smile. Sarfaraz was tired, but seeing the glow on Rania's face,